Chapter 6. The Wild Wastelands of the North. At about 9 o'clock next morning, 3 lonely figures might have been seen picking their way across the shrivel by the shoals and stepping stones. It was a shallow, noisy stream, and even Jill had not wet above her knees when they reached the northern bank. But 50 yards ahead, the land rose up to the beginning of the moor, everything steeply and often in cliffs. "I suppose that's our way," said Scrub, pointing left and west to where the stream flowed. Down from the moor through the shallow gorge, but the Marshwiggle shook his head. "The giants mainly live along the side of that gorge," he said. "You might say the gorge was like a street to them. We'll do better straight ahead, even though it's a bit steep." They found a place where they could scramble up, and in about 10 minutes stood panting at the top. They cast a longing look back at the valley land of Narnia, and then turned their faces to the north. The vast, lonely moors stretched on and up as far as they could see. On their left was rockier ground. Jill thought they must have been at the edge of the Giant's Gorge, and did not much care about looking in that direction. They set out. It was good, springy ground for walking in a day of pale winter sunlight. As they got deeper into the moor, the loneliness increased. One could hear peewits and see the occasional hawk. When they halted in the middle of the morning for a rest and a drink by a stream, Jill was beginning to feel that she might enjoy adventures after all, and said so. "We haven't had any yet," said the Marshwiggle. "Walks after the first halt, like school mornings after break and railway journeys after changing trains, never go on as they were before." When they said it again, Jill noticed that the rocky edge of the gorge had drawn nearer, and the rocks were less flat, more upright than they had been. In fact, they were little towers of rock, and what funny shapes they were. "I do believe," thought Jill, "that all the stories about giants might have come from those funny rocks. If you were coming along here when it was half dark, you could easily think those piles of rock were giants. Look at that one now." You could almost imagine that the lump on top of his head. It would be rather too big for the body, but it would do well enough for an ugly giant. And all that bushy stuff, I suppose it's heather and birds' nests, really would do quite well for hair and beard. And the things sticking out on each side are quite like ears. They'd be horribly big, but then I dare say giants would have big ears like elephants, and oh, her blood froze. The thing moved. It was a real giant. There was no mistaking it. She had seen it turn its head. She had caught a glimpse of the great stupid puff-cheeked face. All the things were giants, not rocks. There were 40 or 50 of them all in a row, obviously standing with their feet on the bottom of the gorge and their elbows resting on the edge of the gorge. Just as men might stand leaning on a wall, lazy men, on a fine morning after breakfast. "Keep straight on," whispered Puddlegum, who had noticed them too. "Don't look at them, and whatever you do, don't run. They'd all be after us in a moment." So they kept on, pretending not to have seen the giants. It was like walking past a gate of a house where there was a fierce dog, only far worse. There were dozens and dozens of these giants. They didn't look angry or kind or interested at all. There was no sign that they had seen the travelers. Then, whiz, 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 some heavy object came hurtling through the air, and with a crash, a big boulder fell 20 paces ahead of them, and then thud, another fell 20 feet behind. Are they aiming at us?" said Scrub. "No," said Puddlegum. "We'd be a good deal safer if they were. They're trying to hit that cairn over there to the right. They won't hit it, you know. It's safe enough. They're such very bad shots. They play cockshies most fine mornings. About the only game they're clever enough to understand. It was horrible time. They seemed no end to the line of giants, and they never ceased hurling stones, some of which fell extremely close, quite apart from the real danger, and very sight and sound of their faces and voices were enough to scare anyone." Jill tried not to look at them. After about 25 minutes, the giants apparently had a quarrel. This put an end to the Cockchees, but it was no pleasant to be within a mile of quarreling giants. They stormed and jeered at one another in long, meaningless words at about 20 syllables each. They foamed and gibbered and jabbed in their rage, and each jump shook the earth like a bomb. They lammed each other on the head with great clumsy stone hammers, but their skulls were so hard that the hammers bounced off again. And then the monsters who had given the blow would drop his hammer and howl the pain because it had stung his fingers. But he was so stupid that he would do exactly the same thing a minute later. This was a good thing in the long run, for by the end of an hour all the giants were so hurt that they sat down and began to cry. When they sat down, their heads were below the edge of the gorge, so that youth saw them no more. But Jill could hear them howling and blubbering and booing like great babies, but even the place was a mile behind. That night they bivouacked on the bare moor, and Puddlegum showed the children how to make the best of their blankets by sleeping back to back. The backs keep each other warm, and you can then have both blankets on top. But it was really chilly even so, and the ground was hard and lumpy. The Marshwiggle told them that they would feel more comfortable if they had thought how very much cooler it would be later on and further north, but this didn't cheer them up at all. They traveled across Eatonsmoor for many days, saving the bacon and living chiefly on the moorfowl. They were not, of course, talking birds, which Eustace the Wiggle shot. Jill rather envied Eustace for being able to shoot. He had learned it on his voyage with King Caspian, and there were countless streams on the moor. They were never short on water. Jill thought that when in books people live on what they shoot, it never tells you what a long, smelly, messy job it is plucking and cleaning dead birds, and how cold it makes your fingers. But the great thing was that they met hardly any giants. One giant saw them, but he only roared with laughter and stamped away after his own business. About the 10th day, they reached a place where the country changed. They came to the northern edge of the moor and looked down on a long, steep slope into a different, grimmer land. At the bottom of the slope were cliffs. Beyond these, a country of high mountains, dark precipices, stone valleys, ravines, so deep and so narrow that one could not see far into them, and rivers that poured out of echoing gorges and plunged suddenly into black depths. Needless to say, it was Puddlegum who pointed out a sprinkling of snow on the more distant slopes. But there'll be more on the north side of them, I shouldn't wonder, he added. It took them some time to reach the foot of the slope, and when they did, they looked down from the top of the cliffs at a river running below them from west to east. It was walled in by precipices on the far side of the wall as on their own, and it was green and sunless, full of rapids and waterfalls. The roars of it shook the earth even where they stood. The bright side of it, said Puddlegum, that if we break our necks getting down the cliffs, then we're safe from being drowned in the river. So true, Puddlegum.